I'm Jack Turner, a 45-year-old accountant from Oregon. Until today, my life had been nothing but ordinary. I had a decent job, a stable paycheck, and a family I believed I could rely on. But it was all a mirage, a life built on comfort and routine. Everything fell apart when I received a phone call at work. It was a slow afternoon, the kind where you aimlessly click through spreadsheets, lost in monotony, waiting for the clock to strike 5. My phone rang, and the screen lit up with a name. Emily, my wife. The call ended before I could answer. I found it strange. Emily never called me during work hours. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her number, but an unfamiliar one. I hesitated before picking up. Jack, old buddy, a man's voice greeted me, brimming with the kind of smugness that only comes from someone who knows something you don't.
Who is this?
I asked, my stomach tightening with unease. The voice remained steady. It's Chris. Chris Matthews. You remember me, don't you? I'm the guy you lost your wife to. The name hit me like a brick. Chris Matthews. Emily's ex-boyfriend from college. The one who vanished for years before suddenly reappearing on our doorstep shortly after we got married. I had always wondered about him, but I'd never dared to ask. Why are you using Emily's phone? I demanded, my pulse quickening. Where is she? Oh, she's here, Chris replied nonchalantly, as if this were just a friendly conversation. We're having lunch. You know, one thing led to another, and now she's in the shower. My heart sank. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak, too shocked to process what I had just heard. You want to hear something funny, Jack? Chris continued, pausing dramatically. She brought a mini hairdryer with her. A hairdryer. For a casual lunch date. She planned this, Jack. She knew exactly what she was doing. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train, knocking the air out of my lungs. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way Emily had grown distant in recent months, how she avoided eye contact, and the way she clung to her phone, keeping secrets. I had been too blind to see it. She told me she wanted to freshen up before coming back to you, Chris added, his voice laced with mockery. She didn't want you to be upset. I could barely hear the last few words. My mind was already reeling, connecting the dots of the last few years. Her distant stares at dinner, her vague excuses to run errands, her sudden need to leave the room during calls. It had all been a lie. You have no right to call me, I muttered, my voice trembling with anger. Why are you telling me this? I just wanted to thank you, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. You might be her husband, but deep down, she's always been mine. Always has been, always will be. How does it feel to know she'll never love you the way she loves me? I hung up, slamming the phone down. My hands trembled, and my head spun with the weight of his words. I had never felt so betrayed, so completely shattered. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a knife straight to my heart. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the phone, my chest tightening with every breath. How had I not seen the signs? How had I let this happen? Within an hour, I packed up my belongings. I withdrew all the money from our joint bank accounts and moved everything into storage. I didn't call Emily. I didn't confront her. What was the point? I knew what I had to do. I left without a word. No explanations, no dramatic confrontation. I just left. I drove for hours. No destination in mind, no plan, just the open road stretching endlessly ahead. It was the only thing that felt right. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but I knew I couldn't go back to that house. Not now, not after everything I had learned. As the miles passed and the sun sank below the horizon, I realized I wasn't just running away from Emily. I was running away from myself, the man who let his life be defined by the illusion of a happy family. But I was also running towards something I couldn't quite define. Freedom, maybe. Peace, perhaps. Or maybe I was just trying to find a way to keep breathing. The past few years had been nothing more than a lie, and now I was free. I didn't know where the road would take me, but I knew I wouldn't find any answers by looking back. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. The endless road stretched on, my headlights slicing through the darkness, but my mind was a storm of fury, confusion, and heartbreak. I had to stop. I pulled into a small, quiet rest area. The parking lot was empty, the overhead light flickered, casting long shadows. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I was paralyzed, too overwhelmed to think clearly, too drained to move. Everything had unraveled so quickly, and now I was left with the hollow echoes of a life that no longer felt like mine. I wanted to scream.
I wanted to smash something.
The anger burned inside me, but it wasn't the kind of rage that demanded action. It was hollow, sharp, a void that needed an outlet but had no way to escape. So I sat there alone in the middle of nowhere. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my daze. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I knew immediately it was Emily. My chest tightened, any remaining shred of calm slipping away. I answered reluctantly. "Jack, please." Emily's voice trembled.
Talk to me.
"I don't know what you heard, but you don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Emily." I cut her off, my voice cold and sharp.
Don't try to explain.
"Don't try to cover it up. I'm done. You've made your choice." Silence hung between us. I could almost feel her confusion, her shock at the ice in my tone. "What do you mean?" "Where are you?" she asked, her voice pleading. "We can fix this. Please, Jack." "No," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You've done enough. I can't fix this and I won't." I ended the call before she could say anything else. I didn't need her apologies or her desperate pleas for forgiveness. What good would they do now? I had spent years ignoring the cracks in our marriage, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I'd been a fool, and there was no undoing it. I couldn't go back to the life I had built on lies and empty promises. I kept driving, leaving everything behind. My past, my home, even myself. But as the road stretched on, I realized I wasn't just running from Emily or the pain she caused. I was running from the man I had become, and I didn't know who I was anymore. Eventually, I drifted into a small, quiet town. It didn't have much, just a few houses, an old diner, and a road that disappeared into the mountains. I parked near an abandoned gas station, drawn to the stillness of the place. Even in the chaos inside me, the solitude felt calming. That's where I met Henry Walker. He was sitting on the porch of a small farmhouse, a bottle of beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. He looked like a man who had lived a hard, solitary life, someone who had seen enough of the world to know what mattered and what didn't. I don't know why, but I felt a pull to speak to him. When he saw me, he nodded, as if he'd been expecting me. "You look like you could use a break," he said, his voice gruff but kind. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Grab a seat, kid. I'm Henry. You look like you've been running for a while." I hesitated, but something in his words made me feel less alone. I sat down, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. "You want to talk about it?" Henry asked after a long silence. He didn't push, just waited. And somehow, I found myself telling him everything. About Emily. About the affair. About how I was trying to run, to escape, but the pain wouldn't let me go. Henry didn't interrupt. He just listened. And that was all I needed. "You know, kid," Henry said eventually, his voice softening, "you've got to let it go. You can't outrun it forever. But you can find something better." It sounded too simple, too easy. But something in his words hit me. Maybe I didn't need to keep running. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to face what had happened and rebuild. Henry offered me a room above his barn. It wasn't much, but it was something, a place to land when I had nowhere else to go. His farm was small, with a handful of horses and a few acres of land. He showed me how to care for the horses, maintain the barn, and find peace in the rhythm of hard work. It was exhausting, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something new. I was doing something real for the first time in years. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't running. I was living. That's when I met Sophia. Sophia was Henry's granddaughter. She had returned to the farm after walking away from a high-powered job in New York City. She had her own story, her own broken pieces to pick up, but there was something about her that caught my attention. She wasn't like anyone I'd known before. She was tough, but beneath that exterior was a vulnerability that made her seem real. It was clear she'd been through her own storm, and like me, she was trying to figure out what came next. She wasn't looking for comfort, and neither was I. But we began to talk about everything and about nothing. We shared our stories, our losses. And somewhere between the long days of work and the quiet nights by the fire, something began to shift. Neither of us was looking for a relationship, but the connection between us was undeniable. I had spent so long running for my life, but here, on this farm, with these people, I was beginning to see that maybe the only way to heal was to stop running and face what I'd been avoiding all along. Sophia didn't know it yet, but she was about to change everything for me. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical. It was the kind of tired that settles in when your mind refuses to stop turning over the wreckage of your life. The barn smelled of hay and leather. The faint sound of horses shifting in their stalls reminded me that there were still things in this world that didn't need to be explained. They just existed. When I stepped outside, Sophia was already up. She stood near the fence, arms crossed against the early morning chill, staring out at the mountains in the distance. I didn't need to ask what she was thinking. Over the past few days, the silence between us had grown comfortable. But even in that silence, I could feel the weight of the connection between us, unspoken but undeniable. "Good morning," I said hesitantly. She turned slowly and gave me a small smile. "Morning." Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it, something she was holding back. I'd been at Henry's farm for over a week now. In that time, I'd fallen into a rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose, a reason to get up every morning. The work was hard, but it was simple, honest, and gave me something tangible to focus on. It was a welcome escape from thoughts of betrayal and broken relationships. But despite the peace I was beginning to find, something still gnawed at me. And part of that something was Sophia. There was a quiet strength about her, but I could see the cracks beneath her surface, the way she guarded herself. She was beautiful and sharp, with eyes that seemed to hold stories she wasn't ready to tell. I knew she was running from something too, just like me. Over time, I started to feel things for her that I wasn't sure I should. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper. I saw the way she began to trust me, little by little. But my heart was still raw, too broken to risk opening up to someone new. "How's the farm treating you?" she asked, breaking me out of my thoughts. I shrugged, my gaze drifting to the horses in the distance. "It's good. Really good." I never thought I'd find something like this. I paused, glancing at her. Something real. Her eyes softened as she stepped closer. "I get that," she said quietly. "I didn't know I needed something like this either." We stood in silence, the wind rustling through the trees. It was the kind of silence that felt safe, where no explanations were necessary. But even then, there was something more, a connection I couldn't quite admit to myself yet. A week passed, and the bond between us deepened. We spent more time together, working side by side, fixing up the barn, tending to the horses. In the evenings, we sat by the fire, the flames casting shadows on our faces as we shared stories about our pasts. Sophia told me about her life in New York, about the high-powered job that had drained her, leaving her empty, and about Mark, the man who had betrayed her trust, shattering her in ways I could see she still struggled to articulate. Though she didn't say it outright, the bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. She had loved him, and he had broken her. The hurt lingered, like a scar she couldn't hide. In return, I shared my own story. I told her about Emily, the affair, the phone call. I told Sophia about the call I received from Chris, the one that shattered everything. I told her how I had tried to fix it all, how I had poured everything into salvaging something that was already broken beyond repair. In the end, I realized there was nothing left to do but walk away. Sophia didn't say much. She didn't have to. She just listened, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly heard. No judgment. No pity. Just understanding. There were moments when I felt a pull toward her that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something more complicated. I wanted to be close to her, but the idea of letting someone into the broken parts of me was terrifying. I wasn't ready, not yet.